This is Sergio, and this is going to be my interview for art history. I interviewed Marshall Edwards. He self-published the Prairie City Response series, and he's currently working on issue 2. And let me just get started with the interview. How did you start in your industry? He replied, I self-published my first comic, Prairie City Response number 1, back in 2013. This was after a few years of cold feet and rewrites. My girlfriend, which is now his wife, encouraged me to just go for it. So I talked to Erick Marquez. Erick was a professional illustrator, and I pitched him my idea. He was impressed with my plans and themes, so I hammered out a script. Production was slow until we launched a Kickstarter so I could get the funds to pay Erick. The fundraiser went well, and I'm proud of PCR number 1. Still, there are a lot of things I want to improve upon for issue 2, which is in production now. Because of the funds it takes to produce comics, I have been writing prose, including a sci-fi horror series and several stories that will appear in anthologies. My next question was, what is your main motivation to constantly create work? I have always wanted to tell stories. I was a lonely kid and stories brought me a lot of joy. Even then, I was kind of picky about what I read, so I would always make my own stories with my toys and things. It was an escape. I still get flashes of stories and settings, and now the goal is to retool them so they can bring other people joy. Otherwise, these stories would just rattle around in my head. The next question is, how do you divide costs or payment with your collaborators? The artists I work with have a page rate for comics or a per illustration rate for illustrated stories. I pay them upfront, usually in 2 or 3 installments. Since my work's not sought after right now, giving them a share of the profits isn't an incentive. When I write for anthologies, I'm paid an upfront sum and a share of the profits. I have a publisher that's interested in my short stories for a smaller fee and a majority share of the profits. Anthologies and short stories are still new territory for me, so I'm finding out how that works. Next question. What do you see as the role of the visual arts in society today, particularly in your profession? In comics, the visual arts serve 2 main purposes, to invoke and to inform. Invoking means to show the reader something they recognize from their own experience or culture and get them committed to a character or story. Invoking can be done by using a certain camera angle or framing a character or object a certain way, or using a certain layout of panels. But these are just a few examples. Invoking is all about getting the reader to relate to and emotionally invest in the story, and the best invoking is done in a way that's not obvious or jarring. Informing is the other role in comic art. This is the nuts and bolts of a story. Who fired the gun in the previous panel? Where is the protagonist running to? And so on. It's much better to show these things than to explain them through dialogue or narration boxes, and good art direction can add power, nuance, and drama to a simple series of events. One of my goals as a writer is to minimize dialogue and leave room for fantastic art to tell the story. Every extra dialogue bubble cuts away at the imagery, replacing a superior storytelling medium with an inferior one. This is why I dislike comic writers like Alan Moore. They're too married to their own words. Have faith in your artists. Next question. New communications and media technologies make imagery almost instantly available. Do you believe that this is having a positive or negative influence on your field or industry? It certainly has an influence on the field. I think whether that influence is positive or negative is debatable. If you're an indie creator, these new technologies are a big boom. You can get your work in front of a huge, sympathetic audience quickly and reliably, especially if you reel that audience in with fan art. I have seen synergy between CartoonHangover's TV shows and talented indie cartoonists. The latter get hired to be storyboard artists, writers, and illustrators for comic book versions of the TV shows. It's pretty great to see. Some of the larger companies that are getting flack for their decisions much faster because of the internet. The Outhouse's "Did DC Comics Do Something Stupid Today?" blog is a testament to that. I don't really consider this a bad thing, especially if it leads audiences to buy comics they like better. Next question. What popular images do you see that are frequently repeated throughout your industry? Oh, just Superman clones with capes, Batman clones with cowls. There is a lot of individual, groundbreaking stuff out there, but seeing variations of the same stale superhero tropes wears me down. It takes something really strikingly differently to get my attention. Another generic hero in another generic city is just not what the industry needs right now. Another trope you see a lot is the refined, rich, somewhat effeminate antagonist who opposes the young, rough, spunky protagonist. It just kind of puts me to sleep unless they can put an interesting spin on it. Next question. Who is one of your favorite visual artists? And or what is your favorite style of visual art? I'm really into Fiona Staples, mainly through her work on the Saga graphic novel series. Every panel is composed masterfully. Her expressions are great, and her style is somehow both smooth and rough and evocative. She keeps the focus on the characters. Even when her scenery is bold, it stays integrated with the action of the panel. Right? And the final question was, how has your knowledge of famous artworks influenced your creative process? I love ancient art and myths. If you look at ancient Egyptian wall art, you see a lot of the elements of modern sequential art. If you're telling the story of a pharaoh hunting, you have one illustration in which to pull that off. That artist will choose the strongest imagery they can to tell that story. The horses are rearing, the bow is drawn and ready to release, the prey is fleeing or cowering in terror. Perhaps looking back at the pharaoh is if it knows its fate. It would do no good to show a slain animal. There's no tension in that image. But with the pharaoh's bow drawn and his prey cowering and injured, we naturally imagine not only the chase that led up to that moment, but we feel the anticipation of the release of that final arrow, a resolution of the tension inherent in the picture. Not only that, but the art gives us cues about the pharaoh's divine nature, traits, and set him apart from his entourage of servants. This is the power that a single illustration can hold.